people! Welcome to the channel. I'm the self-proclaimed Blue Dragon. In the background, I'm working on my character Ozias from Dark Horse. He has only had one scene so far in Dark Horse in Opposition, but he's definitely going to be a more prominent character later on, and his motivations and everything are going to become elucidated as the story moves forward. Wow, I didn't need to use that word, but I wanted to. I wanted to give a quick report before we jump into this video. By the way, this is an art-related channel where I mostly talk about my free not safe for work webcomic Dark Horse. The links are down in the description, but this week I'm going to be answering questions from my patrons at the $5 level or higher, and then any other questions that I get from wherever, I just give priority to the patrons. But before we jump into that, as I was saying, I wanted to give the report that Aradia Beat, TGIF, the 90s zine Kickstarter project was funded. Not only were we funded, but we also were able to reach two of our stretch goals, the trading card stretch goal and the keychain stretch goal. So I am so absolutely happy that happened. Everybody who worked on the project just, oh my gosh, it was just a labor of love. Everybody put their all into it, and I'm so excited to see the printed version as well as all the goodies. So anyone out there who contributed with a pledge, thank you so incredibly much. If you shared it, thank you. And yeah, if you're interested in it, get in contact with me. Leave something in the comments, or I'll give you my professional email, my business email. And if you're interested in getting a copy, I will be getting some copies myself, not from the Kickstarter, but a separate order that the coordinator took from those of us who contributed. And so I will have a couple on hand if anyone is interested in that, but it's not printed yet. I will give updates on that whenever everything goes to print. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I received two questions this time round. The first one, because I mentioned that I do like a lot of reading, depending on the year, depending on what's going on. Sometimes, like one year, I only read like 4 books the whole damn year. I was like, whoa. But 2022, I read an awful lot of books, and somebody had asked me, what were the books that you read? So I'm going to go ahead and answer that question right now, and I'll give just a little bit of what my opinions on the books were, but I'll try not to go into too much detail. First book that I read in 2022 was First Person Singular by Haruki Murakami. It is a collection of short stories. I have read a lot of Murakami's books. I haven't read them all, but my first one was Kafka on the Shore. I read Killing Commendatore with my partner aloud. We alternated. We did that in 2020 when we were staying put, not going out. I also really love After Dark, and The Elephant Vanishes was really good. Both of those were really good. First Person Singular was good as well. I don't think it's his strongest one, but I found stories in it that I liked and that I found very relatable, especially with like the kind of overarching theme that this particular compilation was, embodying. I read Pen and Ink Drawing again by Alfonso Don. Pen and Ink Drawing, again, is not in the title. I've already talked about this book several times. I really like it. I maybe should do like an actual review, but I'm working on my inking. I didn't really have a lot of time to focus on it, but I did have a chance to reread the book again. Read 12 Kingdoms, Sea of Shadow by Fuyumi Ono. Oh my gosh, I loved the anime. The 12 Kingdoms is the same title, but she never finished the story, and therefore the anime also never finished. This is the first one that I believe she published, although I think there might be like a prequel one later in the series, but it is out of print in English. I'm not sure about Japanese, but it definitely is out of print in English because it was published under Tokyo Pop. If you want to read it in English, I found a website that a gentleman did fan translations of, so I will leave that down in the description. Because there is no official published version in English anymore. And they're very expensive on eBay. I don't know if I'm ever going to get a hold of the one copy I don't have. I read Drawing Lesson by Mark Curley. It's really good, particularly for, I think, beginners. My partner actually got that book because he's been doing a little bit of drawing here and there. And I enjoyed it just because I always enjoy Mark Curley. I also checked out from the library Manga Art by Mark Curley. It was a pretty good read. He talked about a lot of the different challenges that he was trying to do with the art in that book, challenge himself by getting outside of his comfort zone. I would recommend checking it out first before buying it, because unless you're a fan of Mark Curley or you're trying to learn something and be inspired, not necessarily something that you would need to own, but it's certainly worth the read. I read a book called Eastern Shadows, Japanese short stories compiled by a man named Jack Hunter. Honestly, I didn't finish this book. I love Japanese folk tales, but something about this read was just, I don't know, it had a lot of really cool art from Japan, and they told you who the artist was, you know, a lot of floating world stuff, and I mean, just a lot of famous artists in general, I should say, not just from the floating world. But, yeah, I don't know, something about this, maybe it was the way it was translated, maybe I just wasn't feeling it, but I didn't finish that book. Weird Sisters by Terry Pratchett, absolutely loved. If you like Shakespeare, if you read a lot of Shakespeare, that definitely enhances this Discworld book because there's a lot of spoofs on Shakespeare. I absolutely loved it. The Color of Magic by Terry Pratchett, fantastic. That's one of the Rincewind the Wizard books. Always love it. Always love Terry Pratchett. Next up, I read The Comic Book Lesson. Again, you can tell that when I like an author, I read a lot of their stuff. Same thing with Neil Gaiman. I feel like I'm caught up with most of Neil Gaiman's books. I need to see if he's got anything new out. But anyway, I digress. The Comic Book Lesson I got for myself. I had that pre-ordered and received it as soon as it was available, and I have definitely found some value in it, and I will reread it and reread it. It's one of those things that, you know, it's a comic book itself, but it's also helping guide you on how to improve your comic book storytelling and artwork and so on and so forth. And I'm a big fan of Mark Crilly. He's really good at educating, so I liked that book. I read The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien to my dad, just because he used to read that to us when we were kids, and I figured it would be nice to spend that with him one last time. The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan. My mom had read this back in the 90s when it came out, loved the shit out of it. I was not in, you know, I wasn't at the place I am now where I really felt the need to read it because I was still fairly young, but I just read it last year and I really liked it. I liked the way the stories were built. I loved seeing like the difference between the mothers and the children, the daughters. I think it's a really good book. I really enjoyed it. Chris Cool by Kaza. I love the shit out of it, even though it is dated and, not gonna lie, a little bit misogynistic. But, you know, I can get around that due to the year that it was written and just how fantastically done it was. I'm definitely going to read it again and find inspiration from it when the Comic Fury zine does the Psychedelica this year, which is later on in 2023, so that'll be cool. The Light Fantastic by Terry Pratchett. Love the shit out of that book. I love Terry Pratchett. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing with my voice. I'm so sorry, everyone. Two more books. I read Atomic Habits by James Clear. I'm going to actually be doing a video on that, and I know it's not necessarily art related, but it does have to do with, you know, keeping organized. I'm not going to do this video until later in the year to see if any of the stuff has stuck with me. I'm not big on self-help gurus and stuff. However, I've actually found this book to be very helpful, and a lot of it falls in line with how I personally make changes in my life. I don't think it could necessarily work for everyone. It might, and there's definitely some issues, but I'll get into that whenever I do a review of it later on. And then finally, I read Snow Crash by Neil Stevenson. Definitely problematic by today's standards, but I really did like the book. I'm interested in coding and stuff since my partner, that's what he does. I've read mixed reviews on it. There's definitely a chapter that has an extremely inappropriate scene that I'm not even going to talk about that made me so incredibly uncomfortable because it was so unnecessary and so just detailed in what was going on. It's not what happens in the chapter that offended me because I understand what the point was and what, you know, the commentary on the villain and blah blah blah. And for the most part, the agency that the teenage girl in the book has was refreshing for once. She had to be rescued a few times, but she also worked into her own rescue. So it's like, yeah, I like that she had some agency, but I felt that specific chapter was very unnecessarily detailed. But otherwise, I liked it. There's some other problems too, but I won't get into it. Overall, I think it was a good book. I enjoyed it, at least. The next question that I got: why don't any of your magical characters have names that indicate their element? Which is a good question, because that is definitely a trope within the magical girl, magical boy, magical MB genre. And it's something that I certainly do respect. names having meanings and kind of reflecting what element they're going to do or what element they're going to have is something that, you know, was evident in Magic Knight Ray Earth, Sailor Moon, even in indie comics like Sleepless Domain. A lot of them do that, and I like that. I enjoy it. But the way I've had several videos kind of discussing the magic system, so I'm not going to like retrace that information. You can watch my, you know, Dark Horse magic list if you want to. I've got a playlist for it. But the way the magic system works is that it's more because it's the character's soul magic, the element doesn't choose them, they choose the element, and therefore, because it's not really predestined and could theoretically change, especially with like the beings that they reach out to, those beings aren't just there for these specific characters, which I don't want to get into spoiler territory. But yeah, their element wasn't predetermined, and so at least in this context, it wouldn't have made sense to me to have their names like related to their element. In some ways they kind of could be related, and I'm not going to get into details, but all the names definitely do have meaning. It's more like how our names shape us. You've got characters who embrace and really embody their names, like Rhiannon, and again, I'm not going to go into detail about why I chose that name, but you know, it's very, I feel, reflects that name very well, considering the context of how she was named after a Fleetwood Mac song by hippies, but also Rhiannon is a witch, and also well, not a witch, but people thought she was a witch. She was actually like the Welsh goddess of horses, and there's a whole lot to do with freedom and fluidity with the concept of horses, which kind of stem back to like my art school days. So I'm not going to get into detail because it's all high tower and it really isn't necessary to understand the story. Same thing with Kana. There's a lot baked into all of her names, except for Candace, which is a throwaway name for her. It's not a name she accepts. So there's going to be more commentary on names, but without like stepping up and saying this, that, and the other, because I'd rather it just be subtext and nuanced. I don't want to tell everyone what the meaning is. Like, I can and will, but I'm not going to do that within the story, and it's not necessary. It's just, you know, like, it's little Easter eggs. If you know what I'm referencing, if you know what this is derived from, then that's a little special Easter egg. It's the same thing with like all my Beatles songs and old music that I like slip into the story. You don't need that. You don't need to know what fucking Beatles song somebody says or where I use it here and whatever. You don't need to know that, but if you see it, if you know to look for it and you find it, it's just one of those little, I spotted it moments. You know what I'm saying? So it's not particularly important, even though the names are important to the characters. They have meaning to me, and that's why I'm writing this story. I want to make something that's entertaining for other people, and I certainly love sharing the ride with other people, but I'm not writing this for commercial means and purposes. If I can make some money off of it, yes, that's great, but I'm writing it for me. So whether or not the names mean anything to anybody else, it's cool if they catch it, but it's not necessary because it's not like, you know, something that you need to enjoy the story. But that was a really good question all the same, because so many magical girl stories actually do have the element kind of hinted at, or just not even hinted. I mean, they're a little blunt, quite honestly. While I appreciate that, I didn't want this to be so on the nose, which is, you know, either way is fine. It's just not what I chose to do. And that's it for this week. I'll be back with another video next Wednesday. Until then, peace and love, fare you well, and keep on trucking.